prompted the move?
It was one of those.
Are we good?
We're live.
We are live with Emma Wright. Thank you and hello.
Hello.
We were just talking about your local to Dunedin. I'm sorry, Dunedin. We're not in Dunedin. We're in Queenstown. We were just doing a big thing about Lake Wakatipu and what it was. It looked like I thought it looked like the taniwha was coming out of the middle of the water out there. And you were saying part of the legend is it breathed. The lake breathes. It comes up and down.
I do believe it does. I do believe there's a legend that under the water the taniwha is alive. I don't know intimately the legend, but I do know that the lake rises and falls, and that's connected to the life somehow of the taniwha.
There we go. A legend says the lake bed was formed when a giant ogre, Kopuwai, Kopuy, was burned while lying asleep, leaving only his heart behind. So that might be the beating, which according to the same legend is the cause of the rhythmic rise and fall
There
of
we
the
go.
lake. Waka can also mean hollow. So Wakatipu literally means, what did I say before? Growing canoe. But waka can also mean hollow.
Oh, there we go.
So growing hollow.
Growing hollow. So the heart of the taniwha is the beating up and down of the...
There's the beating, yes.
And that's cool. And so you moved down 3 years ago from Auckland, from Waiheke Island, which is a lovely hippie place to live in Auckland, beautiful part of the world.
Beautiful part of the world.
What drew you to Queenstown?
Whole lot of things happened at once. So I lived down here when I used to spend every summer here working on the root burn track when I was at university. So I did that, fell in love with the area, and ever since then, so we're talking 30 years, ever since then I've been thinking I want to move back down here. And my brother moved here about 4 years before we did.
Yep.
And on Waiheke, when my children went to school, it suddenly felt really small.
Were they on a ferry off, or was there a school on Waiheke?
There was a school on Waiheke, but every time we wanted to do something with them, a music lesson or Saturday morning sport or go see an orchestra or whatever it was on the ferry, public transport in Auckland. And it started to, or if you want to go away tramping for the weekend, it got really hard.
It's not a big trip, eh? Is it like a 15-minute ferry trip?
It's more like 35 minutes.
Oh, is it that much? And so what would the Waiheke local have a car parked over on the city somewhere?
If you work in Auckland, you would. But my husband and I both worked on the island, so we didn't have our own transport in Auckland.
Right.
And I think it would feel very different if you did.
Yeah, we were thinking, me and Jace were looking out, I know we've got a wide shot, across the far side, because that's quite a ways from Queenstown to South, got to come all the way around. And so you'd want to have a boat there to come across or something. It's even though it's not an island, it's still quite isolated
It would be great,
travel.
wouldn't it?
Yeah.
A little just hop across.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's the thing, like the Hilton up the other arm here, and even here, which is 15 minutes drive from the city. They offer water taxis to town because the lake's right there and the city's right on the water. So why not get a water taxi from over there? I can literally from where we're sitting, I can see the dock over there, which is where the water taxis go to and from on the other side. So
yeah, perfect.
Why not?
So good move, good part of the world to live in.
Great part of the fantastic.
Yeah, and you said that the whānau's come with you. Is that who's that made up of? Partner, children? What is the story?
So my husband and I have 2 kids. So we moved down here. My brother was already down here. He's got a wife and 3 children. And the real culmination the real kind of thing that happened that made us move really was my mother had been living with us on the island, and she passed away. And suddenly we didn't have family on the island anymore. And my kids and my brother's kids are essentially the same age.
Right.
So there was sort of no family there. And then Graham, my husband, his work on the island finished, and there was lots of work for him down here. And it just was all, it was just one of those moments in life where everything comes together.
Right.
And it was just the right thing to do.
And I saw your story. You were in Dunedin delivering a conversation
Yes.
to a school.
Yes.
And I thought, gosh, that looks like an interesting conversation to deliver to a school. That would be an interesting podcast. And we disconnected and didn't connect when you were in Dunedin. But
Yes.
as is obvious, we are not in our studio. We are in Queenstown, staying at the Reese Hotel as we are doing some podcasts up here.
Yes.
And we're just laughing before that we spoke with Emily Wright earlier, and now we're speaking to Emma Wright. It's like, I think there must be...
I just love that so much.
Weird, eh?
When you sent that email and you said you're doing Emily Wright's, and then I was
Yeah,
like, well,
yeah.
this is great. This
Yeah.
is perfect.
So why don't you
I've
give
made
us...
one mistake so far in the outro from when we recorded the audio.
Yeah, I've actually I've written names down just because my brain's going to go backwards, forwards. So,
Yeah.
So we won't mention that other lady anymore.
No,
that
that's
won't get
all
stuck
right.
in my head. So tell us your story. Tell us your story and tell us why you are someone. Jace was saying his wife has watched a webinar seminar you've delivered, and you're speaking in schools and you're speaking to parents. Tell us your story.
So the reason I do webinars to parents and I rock up to schools and talk to schools, that story really starts back when I was 19, really. And when I was 19, I sat down with my parents and I told them I had bulimia.
Right.
And that, quite apart from being a horribly awkward conversation, they didn't really believe me. And I say that not like they thought I was making up some pie in the sky lie to them.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really understand I was telling them I had a really serious mental illness.
Is it? I mean, I know what bulimia is. I feel like, but sometimes you get stuck in your own bubble. I feel like everybody should know what it is. Does everybody know what bulimia is, or do you need to explain what it is in case?
That's a really good question. I'm probably in that bubble too, and if there is anyone listening who doesn't know what bulimia is, it's an eating disorder, and it is an eating disorder that is characterised by eating huge amounts of food, being unable to stop. So that's the binge part of it, and then getting rid of that food by obsessiveness somehow, either inducing vomiting or getting into exercise that is about getting rid of the food.
That's interesting. Look, there you go. I just said I knew what it is, but I only ever thought it was binging and purging.
Yeah.
So actually, bulimia can be binging and then hours of exercise.
It can.
So there you go. I didn't know that.
That's right. So it's that, and so it's really good that you asked that question, because I think that is that's a little known, and it can also be the use of laxatives.
Right.
So it is an eating disorder where it's characterised by, whereas anorexia is characterised by pure starvation.
Right.
It's characterised by binge eating and then periods of starvation or obsessive behaviour to get rid of that food.
People who are bulimic, are they often outwardly healthy looking because they are taking on board calories? Like someone who's anorexic gets skeletal and looks at death's door. People who are bulimic, is it much easier to sort of quote unquote pass as normal because you are getting a certain amount of calories? And say, like if you had we talk about bulimia often, not always, but you see it in young women, young females, and if your young female was eating healthily,
yes,
or eating big amounts like their dad or whatever, and then exercising, you'd think, oh, they're exercising and they're dealing with it all. Is it easier to pass for normal, to hide it?
Well, I think you ask such a good question, because I think it points to something that is incredibly misunderstood in terms of eating disorders. Going back to telling my parents, and they didn't get that I was really sick, is I looked and perfectly what we would call healthy, quote
Right.
unquote, even though I was everything but healthy.
Sure. But you passed for looking healthy.
I passed for looking healthy.
Yeah.
And the other point I really want to make now, because I think it's really a great, it's something that I want people to understand a lot more of. Even though we associate anorexia with looking a certain way, we now know that's a real fallacy. That
Right.
it's possible to be anorexic in pretty much any size body.
Okay.
So anorexia is when a human starves themselves, and it is possible to go into organ failure that is brought on by starvation,
Mm-hmm.
even when you are big. Well, if you think of a bell curve
Mm-hmm.
in terms of size,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you can think of, like, if you take height, and humans come in all sizes from, you know, very, very short to incredibly tall,
Mm-hmm.
and that follows a typical bell curve. If you think of the bell curve of size from incredibly slight to incredibly large, it doesn't matter where you are on that bell curve, it is possible to get anorexia. So one of the things I am trying to do is bust some of those myths around eating disorders, so that people can start to see that it's not just a particular type.
Yeah,
It literally doesn't. There are people who you can look at and go, I imagine they would be anorexic.
Is it possible to stay on that bell curve? You can be anywhere on that bell curve, but if you were going through starvation, if it was a long-term thing, would you eventually, though, lose? Yeah, I don't say lose, but that sounds like
Yeah, no,
isn't
it's a
it?
great question. It's a great question,
Yeah.
and I think this will answer it. Is yes, you can be in organ failure and still be at the very high end of that bell curve. So
Right.
there are stories of parents who I've heard from parents who have taken their children into hospital because they are starving and been told by medical practitioners, good on you. You know, when these children are going into organ
Well,
failure.
good on you that they're
good on
starving.
you for
Because
trying
what?
to lose
They
some
need
weight.
to lose some weight, right?
And it's only because the parent has put up a huge fuss and gone, no, this child is dying. This child needs medical attention, not good on you, that the child survived.
Wow.
So we've got so that's why these myths are quite dangerous, because when we, in our culture, when we assume that weight loss only has a good side and that there's no that there is no downside to it, we can get into some really dangerous territory with people. And you know, like my parents didn't realize I was sick, and I get that now because I didn't look sick.
Yeah,
and
sure.
we are so caught up in our society that health looks a certain way. And one of the things I'm trying to poke at with people is to reconsider that we actually can't look at someone and make a judgment about their health. We get that we can't look at someone and make an assumption about their mental health. That's kind of a given. But at the same time, we can't look at someone and make assumptions about their physical health either.
Are we talking? I was going to say, are we talking fringes when we're talking about those other, like for the anorexic, for example? Are we talking fringes, meaning the ones that the individuals that would present, say, with a healthy BMI or whatever, however you're going to measure it, but an organ failure is far less likely amongst the group of anorexics, other than the skeletal, very slight, you know, obviously bones protruding, or is it a more even spread than that?
I don't have that exact data, but from what I've been looking at, I would say that it's a way more even spread than we imagine. There's the other myth is that anorexia is a disease of young, wealthy females. And while there are young, wealthy white females who get anorexia and are often the ones that are kind of seen,
Yeah.
if you like, because of these misunderstandings that it looks a certain way, etc. Anorexia is not, doesn't discriminate. It really doesn't. It can, and we now.
It's not more prevalent in one part of. I'm not. I've never heard about the wealthy aspect, but I have heard about young white women.
Yes.
Is it more prevalent in one area of society than another?
I do understand that you are more at risk if you're going through puberty,
right,
and if you're going through menopause.
Really?
So
getting anorexia, like in your what would menopause be? 40s, 50s?
Late 40s to mid to late 50s, yeah.
Right. Wow.
So there's clearly a hormonal,
right,
something going on with your hormones that makes you slightly more at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And that really surprises a lot of people, because we sort of, it's easy to imagine that it's something that affects young people,
yep,
and then once you're over a certain age, you don't have to worry about that anymore. And that's not true. It affects men. The data that was used for many years was that 10% of anorexic diagnoses were men.
mm-hmm,
and I just was listening to I can't remember whether it was a podcast or an actual video of a woman called Cynthia Bulick, who's a professor of eating disorders.
Wow.
And Dunedin University, Otago,
okay,
had her, that they brought her down to New Zealand, and she gave a presentation, and she was saying, and she's done the most research on risk factors and statistics and why people get eating disorders. She's really the world leading authority on that, and she was suggesting that it's becoming more sort of 60-40.
Wow.
So it's really, and
so the research is showing some different trends,
yeah,
compared to what maybe the assumptions or even the research showed 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yes.
And is that actually is that more of a recent trend, as in not necessarily they've got better data, but as in men are becoming more and more body conscious?
I think there's a bit of both.
Right.
I think there is some better data. I think there is, that's right. Men are certainly becoming more body conscious. The more we seem to have had more intense focus on body image, even though we know that's not a good thing. And we also seem to and one of the leading risk factors for getting an eating disorder or developing an eating disorder is intentional weight loss, the pursuit of intentional weight loss. So that, and in conjunction with, there is Cynthia Bulick has identified a gene for eating disorders.
Right.
So and it's a gene that gets expressed by an environmental trigger.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So there are genes that, if you like, we have a gene, a sort of a blueprint for how the kind of size and shape we will grow into. So for how high we are, how big our head will be, how long our arms will be. And there's a lot of suggestion that there's also a gene for kind of how much fat our body will have.
When you say a gene, I think about, and it's not to do with food or anything, but I think about, people who are predisposed to get breast cancer or predisposed to, have a psychiatric illness. By what you're saying, what I'm kind of thinking is what you're saying, therefore with that gene, people are more predisposed to go down that path, or is it they're guaranteed?
Yeah. So great question. So there's two types of genes that are quite distinct, and the one that I was just talking about is that there is a gene sort of expression for the kind of size and shape you will kind of naturally grow into, and that has way less environmental effect on it. It's kind of like how you've got blue eyes, there'd have to be a reasonably significant environmental trigger to not get blue eyes. So you're going to grow into a sort of a certain height, a certain shape and size. But the kind of gene that she's talking about for eating disorders is one that literally needs an environmental trigger. So if you are born with this gene, you're not guaranteed at all. And this is your question. You're not guaranteed to get an eating disorder.
Right.
You need to trigger it. And it's triggered via intentional weight loss.
Right. Okay. So that's so
Yes.
intentional weight loss is the trigger.
Yes.
If you've got this gene, that would then make you more likely to be bulimic or anorexic. Is that what we're saying?
Correct.
Wow.
100%.
So like the sort of hormonal biomechanical response to your body going into a state of weight loss, of burning fat and burning through those calories, the body's going to go, hold on a second, and that'll trigger the release,
that's right.
And then they'll go
That's right.
And
Yeah.
then it basically just avalanches from there, because then they're intending to lose weight loss, and they'll go anorexic. And
That's right.
I guess also in that respect, then it'll be, even as Pat was saying earlier, it'll be harder to recognise too, because if they start it right, they're like, right, I'm going to look after myself, I'm going to eat better, and then they start to lose lots of weight. People go, oh, you're doing really well.
Well,
and
it's
actually they're being like, they've gone too far. They'll become anorexic.
Well, and it's not even real. And it's interesting you say they've gone too far, because there really isn't a too far you can go. They. Let me tell my story.
Yeah,
so that you.
I was just thinking, we've been talking for 20 minutes, and so far we've got it. I was 19, and I told my parents.
And it's not even like I care about my story, but I think it illustrates what we're talking about really beautifully. So I was I told my parents then, and I had really awesome parents in so many ways. They were very interested in social justice. So we marched against the Springboks, and my parents both said they were feminists, and I remember talking a lot about social justice around our dinner table.
Sure.
And also they were very connected to us as kids, and so they were connected to what we're doing in our education, and they held health and well-being to a really high value. So we sat down and ate a meal around the dinner table every night, and they made us eat our vegetables before we were allowed pudding, and they talked very openly about the dangers of putting on too much weight.
Yep.
So, you could say that I kind of had a sort of a textbook upbringing. They were doing all the things you do. Yeah. Right? But when you look back on my actual experience of my body growing up in my family, it paints a very different picture to what you would think when you hear that they did all those things.
So when you say your experience, you mean how you received that upbringing?
Yeah.
So your internal experience, because
yes,
your experience, you've just described your experience, but you're talking about now how you how you were inside that experience.
Yeah. So in my family, they were, even though we marched against the Springboks and we talked at over dinner about how everyone was really entitled to same access to resources and respect and yada yada yada. At the same time, there was one group of people that they didn't really extend that kind of courtesy and respect to, and that was people who were bigger.
Right.
So there was a kind of socially acceptable, jokes about bigger people eating too much and not being able, were funny in their world, or people who were taking up too much room in an aeroplane seat. It was fine for them to make rude comments as if they were inconveniencing other people, and really they should go and sort out their health before they come out into society. And the only time I heard my mum badmouth friends was when it was in her mind they had failed their diet.
Right.
So she talked, she was like, I don't know why they don't finish their diet, they'll feel terrible at the beach this year, or so and so should really sort themselves out a bit, and for their health.
Yeah.
And plus they were dieters themselves. So when
were they what people would describe a healthy weight range themselves?
They were what I would describe as a very average weight
So they
range.
weren't particularly prime examples themselves.
No, so they weren't thin.
Okay.
They were sort of a middle of the bell curve, and wanted to be at the end of the bell curve.
So there might have been a bit of projection there.
Oh yeah. Oh look, and look, I don't blame them. There's the cultural pressure, right?
Yep.
And I was a very thin child, so I heard comments about my body. A lot of comments I heard. Oh, she's the beanpole and she's the stick and she can wear anything, and what I wouldn't do to look like her, and. So, and the kind of cultural role models that a young woman growing up in the 70s had were, Twiggy had just been in fashion, and then we had Bo Derek, and then we had Olivia Newton-John in her shiny trousers, and
getting physical.
Yeah, that's right, getting physical. And so, the girl that got the guy, the love interest, the success stories, that they all looked a certain way. And the only person I remember my parents being really talking about and who that they really thought was an awesome role model and an incredible person was David Longy. The only person who didn't fit that kind of cultural stereotype of what you should look like.
So he was so good in other areas of life they could look past that.
They kind of could look past that. And then they were so thrilled that he got the surgery, which then eventually led to his premature death.
Yeah.
So it's really so by the time I went through puberty, and one last, but they were dieters. So I already, by the time I went through puberty, I already knew, Atkins and Pritikin and Weight Watchers and calories in and calories out and good days and bad days and cheat days and weigh-ins. I knew all that vernacular, even though I didn't think it had anything to do with me.
Right.
And then when I went through puberty, because I had been the string bean and the one that people admired, and legs up to my armpits and all that stuff that I got told, it was assumed that I would just fill out a little bit, that I would stay this long, thin thing.
Yep.
And it's so not what happened. It was like someone put a frickin' bicycle pump in my mouth and just overnight, and within a couple of months, I needed an underwire bra, and I had hips, and I had stretch marks that were under my arms and behind my legs and down
from growth spurts.
From growth spurts,
wow.
And and across my hips, and it was so terrifying because I had already understood that I had the body that our culture expects us to have, and that everyone wants. And that you get 10 messages a day before breakfast encouraging you to have. And I had lost it. And I had also internalized the idea that was my fault.
Right.
That because I had heard the messages, I'd heard my parents compliment someone on how much weight they'd lost and how great they looked. And clearly it was their tremendous willpower that had done that. And then I'd heard the bad mouthing behind their backs when inevitably it failed, and so I had this incredible sense of shame and desperation. And so I did what culturally I had been trained to do, which is get a handle on it, not let it get out of control. And so I thought I just need to eat less and exercise more, and everything will work out.
So you talked about the different kinds of bulimia. Were you a binge and exercise?
No, I was a binge and purge and exercise.
Oh, okay.
I went through a whole
triple threat.
Triple threat, and So in the decision to go on that diet, if you like, that decision to sort my body out, get hold of my health, and get back to the praise and the place where I felt like I could be proud of who I was.
Yep.
That was enough to trigger that genetic makeup in me.
Right.
And that led to me trying to get out of that somehow in this very dark, very obsessed place. So my brain, even though on the outside I did really well at school and I had friends and I seemed to be, so by the time I was 19, this had been going on since I was about 14. And when I told my parents, they told me they loved me. They sort of didn't get it, but they told me they loved me and told me they thought I was beautiful. And then they asked if I was over all that now, like I'd sort of told them I was into some kind of strange music that I had now moved on from.
Right.
And I can see, because I didn't appear unhealthy in any real sense, in their mind I wasn't unhealthy. So then when it came time to, and then when I had my own kids, so if we then fast forward from 19 to 4, I had my children when I was 40, so 20 years, I had got into a really good place with myself in terms of I had learnt how to kind of navigate life coming at me without the stresses, without needing to use eating disorder behaviours. And even though I had got to that place, I was still missing a really big piece of the pie, which I will talk about in a minute. But what it meant was, when I had my own kids, when it came to feeding my kids and thinking about their health and well-being, I kind of slipped into the same things my parents did, which was having this hyper focus on healthy food and limiting sugar and telling them they're gorgeous and all the things my parents did to me. And while I was doing this, I kind of, in the back of my mind, could feel it wasn't right. But I didn't know. But I kept doing it because I was doing the things we're taught to do.
So just pause for a sec, because we're now 40 or 40s with kids. That 20-year gap from 19 to then, would you still have kind of identified in your 40s as bulimic, or did you go through some kind of, did you just stop? Did you figure something out to enable you to get through? I know you said like coping mechanisms, but well, I know there's a saying with addiction groups sometimes that the addiction is always in the car park doing press-ups. You know? So what, I don't want to derail the reason why I'm talking, but I'm interested actually between 19, I'm bulimic, and 40, talking about my kids and food. Are we still bulimic? Is there a counselling series in there? What happened just briefly in there?
Okay. the potted history. So between there and there was to start with, the bulimia was still very much alive. Yeah. And dominated my life. Just dominated my life. Even though I did a lot of things to try and get out of it, therapy, support groups, and all those things, still at their heart, and right up until I was 40, even though the actual eating disorder behaviours, the actual binging until I couldn't eat anymore, and the purging, and even though that had really stopped, when I look back, and I was in so much better place than I was, when I look back, I still wasn't free. Right. I still wasn't free to not think about food and not worry about my body. I still was dogged with thoughts of, if my body was just better, my life would be better.
So are you saying that the physical outworking of the bulimia wasn't there, but the inner monologue kind of still was.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And these things
Up until 40 as well?
I think so, yeah. And it kind of morphed into a kind of a obsession with healthy food, you
Right.
know, so I would be anxious about eating something that wasn't clean enough or wasn't processed or was too processed or was too this or too that.
I've also heard that, especially in anorexics, but anorexia and bulimia, it's like the ultimate control. It's like it's a control issue. It's like if I can't control anything else in my world, at least I can control the food that goes into my body, sort of thing.
I think there's absolutely aspects of that. I some people might laugh at this who know me, but I don't think I don't really identify so much with that sense of control.
Okay.
What I really identify with is I had almost no ability to sit and be with myself.
Right.
I had no ability to sit and feel whatever was going on. That I had to literally learn. So I was so used to, because food is such a great numbing agent.
Mm-hmm.
It is so perfect. It's a perfect sort of when your nerves are jangly and you're stressed and you're worried. Food really does calm you down. And
that's why they call it comfort food.
That's why they call it comfort food. And I have learnt over the years that what would happen is I would go to comfort, I would self-soothe, and then because I had started, I had already set up a pattern in my mind that I wasn't going to ever do that again. And then so when I started doing that, I'd get into this, oh my God, I can't stop, and then, but I should stop, and then, oh, well, I've started now, so I may as well carry on. You know, there's this mental sort of gymnastic turmoil that went with it that today is so not there for me. Like now food is just such a brilliant comforter, and it really takes almost nothing now.
Right.
Why it used to take so much... You know, like why it used to take
when you say take so much, you mean take so much of your mind, your thought process?
No,
your
literally
life?
how much food.
Oh, like quantity of it.
Yeah, like quantity.
Okay.
So instead of it requiring 3 packets of biscuits, you know, 2 or 3 are fine now. You know, 2
or 3 individual biscuits.
Individual biscuits. Do you see what I mean? Like it's I get. Like I really don't think there's anything wrong with emotional eating anymore. I used to think, oh, that's a bad thing to do because it would lead to this massive binge and da-da-da-da. And that's because I had all these rules in my mind about how you should eat and what you shouldn't eat and da-da-da-da-da. And now that I have learnt to be really tuned into what my body wants and how it can be comforted by food so beautifully, it really, as I say, it can be as easy as half a muffin, or you know, but with no mental restriction on it. I never go, I'm going to comfort myself with 3 biscuits and that's it. I will never eat any more. It's not like that at all. I'm totally free to eat the entire packet if I need to, because I had to go through this making peace with, that's the wrong thing to say. I needed to find where my satiation was and where my fullness was without mental restriction.
Physical fullness?
Physical fullness and physical satiation. And as soon as I started to tune into that, I realised it took a lot less food to get there than when I'm trying to stop it mentally. Like when I'm trying to go, when I have a mental position about how much I should or shouldn't eat, it's very hard to tune into your body.
Right.
And when you let go of that mental position and tune in, it can be surprising. So we've gone on a great tangent.
Yeah.
So the bit that I learned when I had kids myself was that I was doing all these things like you know, veggies and strategy, policing sugar and strategizing about veggies and making sure that my kids ate a quote unquote healthy diet. And, you know, as I said, it was fraught. We had a lot of fighting about what could, you know, like dinner times would sort of just crumple into these battlefields. And the kind of the moment really came for me when I caught my daughter, who was 7 at the time, in the cupboard, because we didn't have a lot of sweet food in the house.
Yep.
And I caught her at the cupboard shoving lollies into her mouth. And when I say I caught her, I walked into the kitchen and she looked up at me, and everyone's
with a mouthful?
With a mouthful, right? And she had this kind of look of guilt and shame and fear on her face. And it just stopped me in my tracks, and ice just went down my veins, because reflected in her face back at me was everything I had felt.
Yeah, sure.
And in that and that ice down my veins just stopped me, and I just knew then and there that what I was doing doesn't work. And it just became really clear to me that that's what my parents were doing too. And look at the path I was on. So why am I repeating it with my daughter? And I know why I was, because it's the cultural messages we get, and it's what we're trained to do. But I stopped and I went, I'm not going to do this. This is where it ends. This is the line here, and I'm going to do this differently, because I'm not watching her go down that track.
Little tangent again. I'm interested.
Yes.
So you've had this revelation. Do you go to hubby and you have a conversation there about it, or do you just kind of decide to change the ways you're going to do it? Because I'm interested in
I've never been asked that. Yeah.
how he reacted when you went, I've had an epiphany.
Oh, do you know what? I actually don't remember.
Oh, really?
I imagine it was more me. Well, because my next thought was, no fucking idea. Like I'm doing all the things, so what the hell? You know, like seriously, like there just isn't other things to do here. So I imagine I probably didn't go to him. I might have said to him, look, I've had this thought, but I think it was more me internally going,
right.
I think I'll find this path maybe before I.
So
anyway,
I'm interested. I know that we've maybe got another 15 minutes.
Okay.
Because this is like a time capsule.
Yeah.
Just fly by. I'm interested as to what you've learned with your kids, what you learned through that process. Because now what you're doing is giving your story and your advice, for want of a better word, to other people. Yes. And I was talking to you before we started recording that I'm quite excited about the Christmas New Year period and having healthy food kick and that kind of stuff. And you know, me and my kids were talking about it the other day, and they were all excited by getting out and walking the dog more and having healthier food. Because I guess I'm hearing the story, and sometimes maybe I get confused. I mean, it's obvious that I'm not particularly crash hot with food, but I wonder sometimes. It almost feels like the thing you're letting go of.
Yes.
You, as a parent, you can't kind of just let full control go, because you can't also just go, right, twisties for 6 meals a day and then have an incredibly unhealthy child due to what is going into their mouth.
Yes.
And trying to find the healthy balance between not passing on. And trust me, I hear your story about, as a young child dieting and having all these food ideas and obviousnesses from parents.
Yes.
And being careful or doing everything you can not to pass it on to your kids, but also not just letting everything go and then all of a sudden it is just an incredibly unhealthy diet that will actually detrimentally harm their health. It's almost like I had this conversation with someone the other day about when you have to rate physical health and mental health up against each other. Yeah. And I'm not saying either. How do you do it?
Yeah. So this is a very nuanced conversation, and it's so great because what you're pointing to is this cultural kind of problem we have, where we're imagining what we've done is we have confused the size of people with health. So we need to unpick health from size. We need to address them very differently. So when I had kids and that happened, so what I did is I went into the research. I've got a background of I studied, I did a master's degree at university, so I know how to look at research and go, is this telling me something that's useful,
Yep.
or is it telling me BS?
Yep.
So I started to go down this route, and I started to find this information about body image and health and weight that there's like 80 years of data. It's incredibly well researched topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to truncate something we could talk about till 10 o'clock tonight into 15 minutes. And what became really apparent is that we have mistaken the size of someone
Mm-hmm.
to be the cause of their problems. So rather than size is sometimes correlated with problems. Now, I know correlation and cause sounds like nothing. It's just two C words that sound reasonably similar. But the difference is so fundamental
Mm-hmm.
that it's worth really paying attention to, because, for example, if you look at drowning rates and ice cream consumption around the world, you will find those two perfectly correlated.
Right.
But it's
But
really,
it's not causation.
it's really easy to see
Yeah.
that eating an ice cream is not causing drowning. But we have correlated, we have mistaken the way, we have mistaken health and size
Mm-hmm.
as a cause as opposed to a correlation. So
So let me just unpack that a bit. That's the idea, because you're saying we are correlating the size of someone to their problems. You said
we're saying the size of someone
yeah.
is the problem, is the cause of their problem.
Are you saying the size of someone dictates their value? Is that kind of what you're saying? Because I think in society that's true.
I am saying that, but what I'm saying is, from a health perspective,
Yeah.
we often immediately look at someone and go, they're a bigger person,
Yeah.
they're sick. And in order...
So when you say they're problems for you, you're talking about their health
problems, yes.
Okay.
Apologies,
All right.
I should have
All
made
right.
that more clear.
That's fine.
So what I have learnt is that size and health are two incredibly different things.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to increase, so there's two things that you talked about before. There's increasing your health,
Mm-hmm.
and if you do that in a way that isn't related to or thought about in terms of your size, you are far more likely to actually improve your health.
So that would imply something like, if someone was involved in weight loss needs to be the byproduct of the health kick as opposed to the focus.
Love the way you say that.
Yeah.
Brilliantly said. So we're now seeing that things like diabetes and heart disease, when they are approached in a weight neutral
Mm-hmm.
position, with a weight neutral protocol, so we're looking at increasing healthy food, increasing exercise, but we're not weighing people. We're not interested in that. We're actually just interested in their blood pressure and how. And then there's this whole area of social justice that you pointed to, which I would love to talk another 10 hours about as well, because the way we stigmatize people
Yeah.
is really bad for their health.
I have to say, and I've never said this publicly, but I've always wanted to write a blog post on it. You know, being someone who my whole life has been overweight, the word fat is one of those things these days that's still bandied about, like, you know, and I don't want any messages about this, please, if I'm overstepping it, if I'm being a bit too simplistic. But, you know, people get rid of the word retard and get rid of the word faggot and get rid of that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying the word fat has the same historically negative, oppressive that they do.
Yes.
But that word is still used today in such a negative way outside the explaining of how someone looks.
Yeah.
You're a big fat liar.
Oh, look.
You know, these
Look.
sorts of things. You're about, and I heard that not too long ago. I went, oh, and I just thought, and I'm not again saying that it's an exactly even, but you wouldn't hear your big queer liar or your big whatever. So it seems that there is still that societal stigma that
Huge
that
societal
those
stigma.
words are deemed as very negative.
Yes.
And then if you're a big fat liar, if you're big and fat, then it's a bad thing because a big fat liar is bad. You know what I mean?
It's incredibly...
beyond, and I'm saying beyond
Yes.
the health issues.
Well, that's right. It's a social justice issue, and I'm 100% with you. Although I come at it slightly differently, there are a lot of people who are very big-bodied who are embracing the word. They're saying it describes us. We are happy with it. It describes us in a way that is better than any of the other descriptors. So they are really fighting for, and I'm 100% with them, getting rid of the word obesity because it immediately links size with health. It medicalizes the shape of someone's body.
Couldn't that? I mean, I guess I can speak to this with some with some experience, but isn't there also a risk of an overly? I mean, like to describe someone as obese, as a technical medical term, how is that any different from describing someone as tall, or as bald, or as
yes.
as a definition word?
Well, because obesity has linked to it an assumption of sickness.
Right.
And it's not true that just because you are bigger, just because you're at the far end of that's
really interesting.
Size
Like,
scale.
I've never, I mean, like from someone who's always been big, but still am, like have a very good blood pressure and good resting heart rate sort of thing.
Exactly.
But have bad knees and a bad back. So one of my health kicks over summer is and there is a focus to lose weight, but it's losing weight to help me function better. But the objective is not going to be scales and measurements and that kind of stuff. It's going to be just, getting healthier. So it's not actually the focus, but I know that needs to be a part of it to help things like my knees with no padding left in them and that sort of thing. It's interesting, but I've never associated the word obese or overweight with being sick. Maybe it's because I was one of those kids who, played lots of sports, played lots of rugby.
Yeah.
In my 20s, I was on the basketball court for 4 hours a day, every day, and that sort of thing. And still a big kid, big dude. So I was a big dude. I didn't even consider myself a big sick dude, and I don't ever remember feeling from society that they'd say I was big and sick. I remember feeling I was big.
Good.
But I never remember the kind of connotation that you're
Yeah.
also sick.
Okay.
I mean, maybe I'm just too dumb to get what was thrown at me.
No. And there's a lot of because it's now the word obesity is now linked so clearly with the word epidemic.
Right.
We are now seeing that it's.
So could it be a newer thing that it's linked with? If you're big, you're sick.
Yes. Well, I think there has here's another topic. There are so many media messages that talk about health looking a certain way.
Yeah. Yes.
That it's very easy to make a mental connection that if you don't look that way,
Yep.
you're therefore unhealthy.
Yeah.
And so I come from a place where I think language matters. I really think language makes a huge difference to the way we talk. But I love your point about, you're talking about sexist jokes and racist jokes are no longer socially acceptable, or slurs, but it's still socially acceptable to poke fun at the size of someone's body.
Perfect example is, and I can't even think of who it is. It might be the guys from 7 Days, the comedians from 7 Days. I don't even know if I haven't watched 7 Days all this season, but often if there was a reference to Jerry Brownlee, that there was a reference to making a joke about the size of him and how much he eats.
Exactly.
Whereas if there was a reference to, say, Georgina Bayer back in the day, there'd never be a joke about, her sexuality or her.
Exactly.
So I see, and I'm not being precious because I'm, could be seen as a target of these jokes. I've got pretty thick skin from doing what I've done in my working career, but I'm smart enough to actually see that there aren't many groups of people in 2019, 2020 where no one will really bat an eyelid if you make a joke of them based on that particular attribute of being overweight.
Yeah, and I think this is, and all these little all these things, like the way we talk about body size, that the jokes are okay. 80% of kids cartoons and movies stereotype people in bigger bodies as being lazy and being negative. Kids who are 5 are already, when you look at research being done, they already associate people in big bodies as not as nice people.
Right.
We've got 14-year-olds who are saying they would rather lose weight than do well in school. Now, we just need to think about that. They would rather lose weight than do well in school. That is just insanity to me, that we've got a culture that promotes that. But I want to tell you, so Kmart, I don't want to defame anyone, but Kmart at the moment is selling a T-shirt with an avocado on it that says something about "I'm the good fat." Mm-hmm. And I look at that and I'm like...
And what you see, that implies there's a bad fat?
Yeah, that implies there's a bad fat, right? And someone puts that on their body, right? And I'm like, Kmart would not get away with putting a brown onion or a brown pear on a T-shirt and saying, "I'm a good brown." You know, like, seriously?
It's an interesting point you're making, but I think, see, where I go to straight away is the bad fat is the trans fat and that kind of stuff, as opposed to, I don't link that to saying they're talking about there's a good fat in the fruit, that means bad fat are bad people. But
I
don't know. I mean,
do you know what I mean?
I do know what you're saying.
I just think that it's too easy to, and you know, there'll be people out there who think I'm being, you know, too politically correct, but I feel like it's important to me because of the, you know, what happened to me.
For sure.
I think I'm so glad to hear your story and you didn't internalize that stigma.
Yeah,
there's a lot of people who have, and
I don't ever remember that. I don't ever remember thinking they're saying I'm sick. You know, it's just it's not ever anything I thought of. Like, now that I've got fucked knees and a bit of arthritis in my spine and I'm in a bit more pain sort of thing from day to day, it does make sense for me to put less stress on those joints. And the other thing I was going to say to you is, all this conversation, I'm still left with this thought, and I'm probably going to completely undermine the whole conversation by saying this.
Oh no.
But you don't see really old fat people. You know, there's this longevity of life thing, which, I mean, I would think would be a health marker. I mean, I was watching Jack Whitehall. He does this show on Netflix the other day where he tours America with his father. It's called Travels with My Father or something. And they went to a retirement village in America, and it just hit me again. I've said, there's no one there, these 80s and 90-year-olds, who are overweight. And so part of me kind of going, I'm on board. I hear what you're saying, and I'm not trying to undermine the message. I'm saying, but surely, unless I'm just so indoctrinated from my life of it, there is a health marker that says, if you could pick a healthy body, like if you're going to pick statistically which is a healthy option, it wouldn't be one with a heart surrounded by more fat as opposed to one with less fat.
I think I will.
We need to book in a part 2, don't we?
We do need to book in a part 2. I think that you would be surprised at the actual data.
Okay.
And I think the health markers are much more about how do I say this succinctly? How the society around you treats you is incredibly important.
Yep.
And there's a lot more to it. So there's also this thing called the obesity paradox, where they see that people in certain BMI categories, and I hate BMI because I don't think it tells us anything.
Can I just say this on BMI? If BMI was accurate, all of the front row, every All Black forward would be morbidly obese.
Exactly, and it just doesn't tell us anything.
I remember doing my BMI and then being told I was morbidly obese, and I assumed that morbidly obese people needed to be moved with forklifts out of their apartments when they died. You know, that's what morbid to me, morbidly obese, because morbid's from is like
mobility.
Morbid as in like. Mortality is something, isn't it? Like possibly, or disfigured.
Yeah,
you know?
or going. It's morbid. It's going to kill you.
Yeah.
So it's sort of thing. But so there's a whole lot of misunderstandings. When you look at the data, it's not nearly as clear cut, and it does go back to the cause versus correlation.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more, or I just want to say there's a lot more to it. It's not as clear cut as big people will die younger. Like it's just not that clear cut. There's so many, and we just don't have time to go into it today. But I'd love to do a part 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
To get more into it, because I think it's it's a topic that is so misunderstood. And in the meantime, I can send you some great research that'll get you that when you're looking at your health to go, oh, okay, maybe I could just switch it this way, approach it this way, and you'll find that it makes, like when you truly are putting attention on strengthening your knees and your back and your muscles and taking the focus completely off, anything else, it kind of takes care of itself.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd totally be up for reading that. Hey, well, look, you are someone who goes and advises parents, talks to people about body image, especially when how parents can interact and talk to their kids about body image.
Yes.
We haven't really gotten to a lot of it. We've talked your story through.
Yep.
But if people want to find out more about that, more about you, emmawright.co.nz.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And look, I think next time you're in Dunedin, and surely you must get down there
I
once every few months.
I haven't got a trip booked, but next time I will make sure that we get another session. And absolutely.
Let's do this again, Jace. And let's get into the parenting aspect of it. But I think it's really also good to get out. We often talk for an hour and a half or 2 hours. These things. That's what we do.
Yes.
We've got into your story, and we've got into maybe some of the background in this, which I think has been really valuable and really, really important and interesting, including maybe setting up some clarity or clarifying some things that people don't know so much about.
Absolutely.
Even I started off this arrogant thing saying, I know what bulimia is, and then you talked about 2 other ways. I'm like, oh shit, I don't know what that.
Yeah.
And I think we're in a perfect position that in the new year or something, we springboard into the second one and do it again.
Yes.
In our Dunedin studio, perhaps.
Yes,
and,
absolutely.
Other than that, people can find you at emmawright.co.nz if they want to read more about it.
They can indeed, and there's also on there's some free resources people can grab if they've got a child telling them they hate their body, and so many parents are like, oh, my child said this, I've got no idea what to say.
Yep.
It gives you sort of step-by-step instructions on how to have those conversations. There's a bedtime gratitude script so you can send your kid off to sleep so that they're focusing on what their body does and feeling good about it as opposed to what it looks like. So there's a whole lot of stuff there to help parents have these conversations and to set up an environment where body image issues can't really get a hold on their kids.
Cool. And I guess we're saying we'll probably pick this up in 2020.
Awesome.
Emma Wright, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.